Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar about help desk outsourcing on the rise, keys to a successful implementation. My name is Fabiana, and I'm part of the marketing and business development team here at Oxys. As a reminder for all of the attendees, your microphones are muted. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar, and we will make sure to address them either during the panel discussion or at the conclusion of the panel. Now, I'm very happy to introduce you to our panel moderator for today, Raul Vega, our CEO at Oxys.
Thanks, Fabiana. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I think we have a great panel, and it should be an interesting topic. To get us started, the reason we're doing this help desk outsourcing discussion is, us as a firm, if you're not aware, we're a professional service firm, work a lot in the IT space and IT transformation. And a big part of our services is help desk operations. We have a center in Costa Rica that supplies services to the US and different parts of the world. And what we've seen over the last few years is really a big focus on the help desk as a key enabler for really the perception of the IT department and broader IT transformation. And what's interesting, while it's not something that is going to give direct competitive advantage and from a commercial perspective to most companies, if it's not done right, it really creates a lot of problems for the IT department and the overall organization. So we thought it was a very timely topic. There's been a lot of changes in this area. So we're excited with the panel we have. I want to introduce them and give you a little background and what their perspectives will be. I'll start off with May Hanady, who has actually been a longtime client of Oxys, and we're excited to have her here today. May was most recently with Hollander in the CPG industry, but brings over 25 years as a CIO across multiple industries, not only consumer goods, but agriculture, specialty contracting, the restaurant industry. So really brings a really broad perspective as a CIO, both on a multinational level with publicly traded organizations as well as PE-backed organizations. So I'm really excited to get May's perspective. I think it's going to be really insightful for the attendees. And then Alvaro Prieto, who's my co-founder and partner here at Oxys, really also brings a very different perspective. He's been obviously with Oxys 24 years now, working and leading our IT transformation and operations practice, working across multiple industries and helping CIOs like May really take their organizations to the next level, not only from a advisory perspective in terms of areas like operations, but he's been involved in large IT transformations from an ERP perspective, software development, and worked on multiple delivery models, both international and national, and has built up and led our help desk practice, which supports close to 100 clients across multiple industries. And I think he's going to bring a real perspective in terms of what he sees with different clients. So I think we have a great balance between the two, and we're really looking forward to it. So let's get started with that. If I can just figure out how to move my slide. There we go. So first thing I wanted to kind of give a little perspective, on what we've been seeing, and that kind of led to focusing a little bit on the help desk, because we see it as a real key enabler. If we look at IT organizations overall, they're always constantly strained and under pressure, and the business is always demanding more and more and more from a digital transformation, from a governance perspective. And at the end of the day, if a user who's a very important user isn't handled right, everything else becomes secondary to that priority, or the engineers are getting bogged down, or the developers with user support issues. So what you've seen is as the business models have exchanged, not only with this work from home over the last 18 months, which has a huge implication to the help desk, but even SaaS products, cloud products, it really is adding a lot of complexity into the support model. And what we've seen is companies really looking at their business. And when you see some of the data here on this slide, there's a lot of investment starting to go into the help desk. People are realizing the importance of that, but they're also realizing that maybe this is something they shouldn't be doing in-house, that is better to be outsourced, to have someone who does this 24/7 do this, and let them focus on stuff that's more commercially relevant to them. So there's been a lot of change there, and help desk is not an easy area to operate. If you see just there on the turnover, this is an area that does take a lot of management bandwidth to run right and to do it correctly, and investment. So there's been changes there as well that we see in how the model is moving. But the importance, I think, is just getting increasing, and users are expecting more and more. It's part, I think, of the new internet age, and on demand, everything extends to user support. So I wanted to kind of give a little perspective, and then we'll dive into it. So this is actually answers to the participants today on how they answered a few key questions. So if you look on the left-hand side, great majority, it's, the 68% plus the 12% plus the 6 are either looking at outsourcing or are currently outsourcing. So it's almost 85% are in the process of either looking or switching. So there's a lot of people here who are very interested in looking at an outsourced model. Now, what's also interesting, if you look on the right-hand side, is what some of the drivers are, and very often when people think of outsourcing, especially the old model of outsourcing, it was cost savings, right? Labor arbitrage, let's move it all to India, or whatever the model was. And what you see here is cost driver is a factor, it always is, but it's not the factor, right? If you look at the first one, it's really improving service levels, best practices, and freeing up the team to do higher value activities, which I think is consistent what we've seen quite a bit. Alvaro, I don't know if you or May, either one of you, have any reaction to that. Does any of that surprise you, or kind of in line with what you would expect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised on the answers, but glad to see that the service level improvement is definitely one of the key drivers that we have seen, and most of the conversations that we have with our customers are really related. They first start with what they're looking to achieve, and 9 out of 10 times is really exactly doing, getting better service levels and maturing the organization from a process perspective. So it's very well in line with the trends that we see in the market, and what companies are looking for. And I think cost is from a priority perspective is really not what we've seen typically today. So I'm glad to see the answers, and be interesting, May, if from your perspective, having dealt with these kind of decisions in the past, what do you see? How do you see the answers align with the type of things you've seen in the before?
Yeah, I think it aligns with my experience at all of the companies I've been in so far for the last, 25 plus years. I think the first and the last are more applicable from my experience with the majority of the companies in terms of, improving the service levels and access, in addition to the cost, the ability to do this and more efficient and user-friendly manner in terms of addressing, the enterprise user community, but with a reasonable cost.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I think this is really interesting because typically people think costs, and I always think cost has a factor, or definitely business case has a factor, but service, I think, is the name of the game, especially in help desk, right? Or improving. If you're not going to improve something, you're not going to outsource it, even if you can save money. I think companies want improvement. So let's talk a little bit. I want to get into, before we get into kind of the help desk and how to operate it and how to outsource it. I think one of the big things that I see, and as a CEO and as a longtime consultant, I work with a lot of, say, called the business executive side of the house. And since I have my hands on both sides, IT and the business side a lot, I always see this misalignment and misperception from the business that they're almost setting up the IT department for failure, right? So they want certain things, but they don't really have an understanding of what it takes to get there. And I think help desk is a good example. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, because I think anybody who's going on a journey to fix their help desk has to deal with these misperceptions, right? So here's just some that we kind of put together that we see quite a bit. But one that I think is interesting, Alvaro, is that the help desk is just incident handling, right? They're just going to come in and handle tickets, and that's all the help desk does. It's pretty simple. Right. Why can't they do it right? Kind of, what are your perspectives on some of the things you see that you talk to so many clients all the time? I mean, every week you're talking to someone that are consistent themes that are important for people to realize.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that as far as being ticket processing center, where the help desk traditionally has grown from fairly immature kind of operations into something that the business now expecting a lot more from them, especially when things starting to change from a business side. And the help desk is not mature enough to really deliver those kind of services, and they stick to be just managing tickets and dealing with those kind of things. It becomes an issue. And but the business says, hey, you guys are IT guys, you should know pretty much, how to handle anything. And that is obviously a wrong expectation. Typically, we deal with those type of things by, putting together good service catalogs and things like that will really describe what the operation really is delivering for the business. But that misalignment, we see it day in and day out. And for us, one of the best things to deal with that is really with with more clearly defined services, right? And something that the business understands. It's not techie language, or services that are very technically related, but it's something that the business really understand, and that really helps basically deal with that gap between the two sides. And the other thing is around service levels, which is we just talk about that. Very important to align the business with the expectation of what is 100%. Every time I call, they should be able to answer all my questions. And that's a big issue for a lot of help desk organizations, where they really don't. The business just expects that pretty much all the time, and in the right way. It's just that the services perhaps may not be ready or prepared to deal with the kind of things that may be coming from the business side. So I like making sure that the business understand what does it mean, how much is it cost to really deliver 100%. We all know that that's as expensive as can be. That's a very interesting discussion to have with the organization, and we've been in many situations where the business understands that they don't want to achieve 100%. So what is the number? Is it 90? Is it 80? What does that mean in terms of cost and service? So very important to get those two things aligned as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. May, you've gone into a lot of situations where you've come in and you've had to turn around the IT department, right? And the perception, I think, of the IT department. So kind of what is the stuff that you normally see? I'm sure there's patterns that you kind of say, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do here. But what is kind of your perspective, given kind of you've gone into multiple scenarios and how you gonna approach it?
Yeah, as we all know, every company is different. However, there is uniqueness and kind of commonality between the different companies, different industries, in terms of the enterprise expectations of the help desk and the IT help desk services. And a lot of the cases, the expectations are 100% or more than 100%. However, I think the understanding of the effort and what's required to basically be able to man the service desk, especially in the cases where you have 24/7 business needs throughout the different regions or the countries, etc. It's a misexpectation, from the help desk with the enterprise, and it takes a lot to basically not only just from the initial kind of understanding and setting the requirements and the costs and the SLAs based on the catalog of services, etc. But I think the key is basically the ongoing process to make sure that both ways are really partnering with this. It's not just, access, for example, in my case with experience, kind of providing the service, but you really have to have a partner, kind of a working relationship to ensure the continuation of the services and the enhancements and the changes in the enterprise are reflected, with your help desk services and agreements, et cetera. But a lot of the time it is misexpectation. And again, it depends on the audience too. And each company, each enterprise, from my experience, have had different levels also of user communities and their own understanding and, expectations and competencies in the various, areas of what we're supposed to support them with. So it's a challenge, but definitely there's always misexpectation on both ends.
Yeah, It's interesting. You mentioned a
Yeah.
few buttons that we see quite a bit. One is the 24/7 question, or extended hours, even if it's not 24/7. That, when we talk to a lot of prospects, when they're first looking to say, hey, I think I want to leverage your model for help desk outsourcing, they'll look at ticket volumes and they'll say, okay, we have X amount of ticket volumes, and everybody does the math and says, okay, I should be able to do X amount of tickets per agent. But they don't really take into consideration the extended hours of support, the needs to have backups, and how that really explodes the labor required to deliver the service, right? If it was just a 40-hour week, you'd have a very much different number on the labor the agents required. And that seems to be a very common gap in terms of educating. Is that something you've seen, May, when you've gone in and had to have discussions on, hey, if we want 24/7, it's going to require this level of investment tied to the service that the company's going to expect, right? Because you can't have one agent sitting there every time. So how have you seen that a lot?
Yeah, certainly. And in my case, almost all of them really had the need of 24/7. But then you look into, okay, what's required and what's the cost, and based on, the incidents and the requests and changes and so on, and the hours of operations, I get kind of like input. Well, we only, had like whatever, 2 or 3 tickets over the weekend, for example, Sunday or Saturday. But, why do we have to pay for that? Well, because somebody has to basically respond to that, call, and you have to have a live agent to be able to escalate to correct, engineer, etc., to address the issue. So yeah, that's definitely been a misexpectation in terms of the coverage and what's really required. If you need somebody to be, to be able to respond is one thing, but also to really address and assign the needed engineer in the area of the competency that's required for the enterprise is another, area of misexpectation. And I think that sometimes, challenges and, satisfaction or low satisfaction and so on due to that, level of understanding of what's needed. And in most cases, the reason I've gone through outsourcing, partnership with Access on this and other services is basically, I've done evaluation almost on everyone based on the enterprise, their needs, their requirements, their expectations, and of course the cost. And due to the fact that 24/7 requires multiple shifts, maybe not all categories and areas, but in certain critical ones, you really have to basically, hire, recruit, and maintain basically multiple shifts within the organization, which in my case has not been feasible. Has not been feasible at all.
Yeah.
That's why,
Yeah, and keeping up with the multiple shifts, it's from a delivery perspective, it really requires to have a full organization that documents, right, the type of things that the agents have to handle and deal with on a consistent basis to be able to deliver a consistent service, which at the end improves the service levels. But having that type of handoff between shift one and shift two, it's from a delivery perspective, it's tricky, and most organizations just underestimate what it takes, right? It's not just like it says here in one of the slides, this slide about the tribal knowledge. They expect all the agents to know exactly the same type of things, and that's that to be able to achieve something like that, it's not just only training. It requires to have good knowledge management practices and different things that we're gonna talk later on. But that's a very important aspect of understanding what it takes to really deliver a true 24/7 and the type of efforts that you gotta go with.
I agree with both of you. I think that one of the big lessons learned, I think that companies should take, if you're looking, if you're bringing it in from the IT perspective and they're asking you to really improve it, is really educating the business on the cost of their services that they want. Because I think what happens is people say, I want this, I want this, I want this, but they don't really understand what it takes. And once they understand what it takes, they really don't need it in a lot of cases, right? They can get by without it. So there's a business discussion to be had, but a lot of times people aren't armed to have those business discussions from an IT perspective, right? And they got to really focus on what May just laid out, right? The types of service, the people, the staffing, what's required to deliver that, which kind of opens up the other point on the tribal knowledge that Alvaro, you brought up. It's, most of the, people who aren't doing the help desk well very often don't have the processes and the structure, and they're relying on people, right? And to get good processes, to get good services, you need good processes. And one of the things I've seen, May, and I'm interested as well on your perspective, is that a lot of times users get frustrated when you tell them they have to follow a process, right, at first. And I don't want to go to the help desk. I want to go right to the engineer because I know that's the person that knows my answer, but it kind of sets you up for failure. And there's this change management issue that's key, I think, from a perception. Is that something you've dealt with commonly?
Yeah, certainly. With quality services such as help desk or any other, software or technology support services, it requires a disciplined process to be able to continue to review, analyze, data, actual data, factual data based on instance requests and changes, trends, problems, issues, etc., to be able to continue to, improve on it, improve on the quality. But however, in most cases, with many organizations, discipline process is considered or perceived as, too complicated and it takes too much time. All I want to is to address my issue, and I don't care what you want to go through. It's not my issue. So yes, and that's not the case with just help desk. That's the case with every really kind of quality service provided by any of the technology companies, such as, for example, software, major software companies, that if you engage with them also, you have to go through a disciplined process. And from an IT perspective, we know what's required. We follow through because we understand what that means and what their ramifications are, if not. But however, it is, I think, I would say an expectation from the enterprise sometimes is misaligned. And I take that, I guess, on, myself as, the responsible for that as well, to continue to educate the enterprise on that, because, and it's a challenge, because, everybody is extremely busy with the many business challenges and etc. And, the help desk is the least of, the enterprise kind of, to be able to place a focus on it and so on, except for I want my issue to be addressed. So It's definitely
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that's really important. So with that, let's switch gear here a little bit. I think we're going to have a polling question now that Fabiana is going to handle it.
I'm pulling it right now. It is, how would you rate the level of support that your users are getting today? Excellent, very good, fair, poor, or extremely poor?
I'll just give it a minute so people can answer, and we'll see what the results are.
Yes, we have collected like half of the responses by now, and I'll give it a couple of more seconds.
Curious. If it's all excellent, I don't know if they'll be on the call. I'll be surprised. I'm going to be ahead of time. If everybody's excellent, I'm going to be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah.
So excellent, just 15%, very good, 35%, fair, 35%, and poor, 15%.
What was the fair number you said?
35%.
Fair was 35%. So yeah,
so about
70%
is fair, very good. Got it. That's actually better than I thought. That's pretty good. All right. So now what we want to do is, given that discussion of the challenges and some of the misperceptions, I guess, let's switch gears a little bit to really, what does a modern help desk really look like? What are some of the attributes? How to do it the right way? Because as we know, it's really a lot more than break and fix, right? Which is the old term and the old model. It's a break and fix model, right? So Alvaro, I know this is kind of your philosophy and your viewpoint, of what we
Mhm.
try to do with our clients. Why don't we talk a little bit about that, and then we can get May's perspective as well on how she sees it.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so first, I mean, from a help desk perspective, I think the one of the key things is what is the goal of the service desk? I mean, to me, it's a service, obviously, it's a service organization, and there's many, there's specific things that we believe it takes to deliver a good service, right? I mean, one of the things, as I think it was mentioned just a few minutes ago, is really the importance of having structured processes and disciplines within the organization to deliver a good service. So that's absolutely, for us, is key, and for any organization. I'm sure you're part of all the organizations, is the ultimate goal is to deliver a good, consistent service. So processes have to support that. And the processes, if you look at it from a macro perspective, those processes have to be measured. Can measure, can manage, right? So if you have you have to have the right technology in many ways to be able to capture what's going on within those processes. And when I talk about processes, I'm talking about the supporting processes as a typical help desk typically deal with. What we typically find when we go into organizations that are looking to outsource is that their incident, their help desk is basically doing what we call the incident management process, basically doing the whole, classification, prioritization, and closing of a ticket, recording, closing tickets. But they really don't capture beyond that. And what I mean by that is there's other processes that are very important, like your request management process, things that the organization needs that have to be handled a little bit different, having different things to understand if how often these issues are recurring to the organization, how much time is it taking, those kind of things. Being able to have true visibility over what is happening behind the scenes from an operations is very important, and also from delivering the service to the business and showing the results of the service desk on a regular basis, very important. And then having, once you have the basics, I would call, right, having structured processes, good metrics, good measures, you want to start really optimizing those type of operations. And today, everyone is hearing about the automation initiatives that are going on in multiple aspects of organizations. But from a help desk perspective, automation is essential as well. And I'm talking about the kind of things that you can achieve through self-service portals, or what we call level 0. Also through chatbots that are helping, processing tickets without having an agent being involved, from what we call a touchless ticket, which is done through these type of chatbot technologies that are accessing the knowledge base perhaps that exists within the organization that has been developed by the organization to deliver these kind of services. So these are very important things to really run I would say, a modern IT help desk today. And last but not least is really having the ability to have a robust knowledge base that is constantly evolving. So all the kind of things that are being done by the help desk, you got to have a strong knowledge base to be able to support the delivery of that service once again, because the focus is just from our perspective, the focus is delivering a consistent, good service. So these are some of the key components that I see and we actually implement. I mean, we preach, we eat our own dog food, as they said, and we preach, we do these type of things day in and day out, and we've seen the evolution on all these, so many years doing these type of things of the help desk and where it's at today. And these are the type, this is where we, where we are today. Next year, probably it will be, it will advance into other things like, advanced analytics and machine learning kind of things and intelligent bots that are doing a lot of things up front. But where we are today, we are just in where I just described.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think for a lot of organizations, this is a great way to benchmark yourself, right? It's like if I'm getting there, when you think of the misperceptions we spoke about, now you mentioned level 0. I think you mean, to me, for people who may not be, that's what exactly is that? Is that user resolving the issues
Yeah,
themselves?
the level 0, yeah, it's basically where the users are resolving their own tickets. It used to be done traditionally through self-help portals. And that's just basically having the user going into your portal and then having a knowledge article that they can actually take and follow and resolve their own issues. But now level zeros are, and the adoption of self-help portals is quite a challenge for a lot of organizations because they just don't have the knowledge base typically, or they even sometimes they don't even have the technology to even have a self-help portal. But now we're seeing it more being delivered by chatbot technology. So the chatbots are taking requests, and we're seeing if you go to any bank today in the United States, you see that banks are dealing with chatbots right there, where you can do pretty much anything that you can do typically from talking to an agent from a basic level 1 type of support. So it's the same kind of thing. Airlines are doing the same things. Very big organizations are dealing with that, and that's in a way it's a help desk for them. And we're doing the same type of thing, adopting chatbot technologies that allow for the automation of certain processes,
Okay, great.
like solving password resets and things like that.
Great. So May, from your perspective, as a CIO, and say you're bringing in and you've decided, let's say you've decided to outsource it, and what are the things that you're looking for, and when you look at this list, is this it, or is it kind of like, how do you prioritize where they're going to bring the most value and what your expectation would be? If I'm not going to do it myself, I'm expecting these things, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Alvaro hit on, all of it, which is key. And obviously for consideration when I evaluate, help desk or support services providers and services. In addition to that, all of this is basically kind of, given and assumed and really required at this point, and maybe further automation, not just kind of like at the user level zero perspective, but also at the back end perspective, where basically, the incidents and the categories and, the whatever the nature of them and the root cause of them. Definitely there's a process for like a problem, but for more of an automated manner to basically really more of like getting into the AI perspective, right? To really try to understand, where the root causes of maybe the consistent or continual problems are, to get them resolved and minimize, the day-to-day support incidents. In addition to, I would add, it's very key, whoever you work with, that you consider them as your partner, as part of your IT team. To me, when I first kind of outsourced years back as my first kind of, CIO role and my first outsourcing experience, I did not really consider that, like, okay, it's a vendor, I'm working with them on the service, we're paying this and they're providing that. And frankly, did not do well. So you kind of learn as you go through your experiences, and definitely you really have to make sure that, whoever you're engaging with is someone that you can partner with, because, if they do a good job, meaning, IT is basically shining the enterprise and the business. And if they're not, helping you address your business needs, then obviously they're not the good partner.
Right.
So to me, that's another kind of key category that, I learned, I guess, throughout the many years I've been doing this.
No, that's a great point. I mean, that's key. I think we're going to get into a little bit more of those things. So that's a great insight. So if we keep moving, so one of the things that we laid out there before is having a multi-tiered service model, right? And this, I guess, gets a little bit into the issue where sometimes it's obvious, I think, but it's not always obvious to people outside IT, right? One of the big goals that I see from a business perspective of why you have a really good service desk is that I want my high-end engineers and developers not to get bogged down with user requests, right? And the reality is that the service desk is the key component to making that happen, but they do a lot more than just handling tickets, right? And what we're showing here a little bit is the role of the service desk and how to think about it, because it goes beyond ticket resolution and how they interact with the users to a lot of other things. Alvaro, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate maybe a little bit on some of those key things that people really should expect from a good service desk and how to run it the right way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned no bugging the engineers, and that's one thing that when you look at the ticket, the type of tickets on an organization that perhaps is not looking to move as many things to the help desk as possible, when you see that when that's not happening, is typically because they don't really are documenting in a good way what the engineers are doing. So some of the level one tickets, you want to pass that to your help desk up front. And another thing that's very important here, I don't know if in the picture we can actually see it, but it's really the help desk being able to handle the tickets from beginning to end. That doesn't mean, goes from level one and it's escalated to your level two teams, and then they hand off the ticket and they cannot, and they don't see it again. We talk to customers all the time that what they like to know, what like to have is a help desk that is basically that owns the ticket from beginning to end. So regardless of the level of support that is going through. So if you go to a level 4, meaning you are outside of the organization to your application provider, or let's say your hardware provider, or whatever issue that is related to, you want to have the help desk being communicating with the end users or whoever is being impacted by this ticket throughout the entire life cycle of the resolution of that issue. So it's very important to have that kind of visibility. A lot of organizations really fail at that point because they just hand off to other teams, and then the end users and the people dealing with these issues having to contact multiple resources or people to understand what's going on with the resolution of those particular issues. So yeah,
I
so
think that's a
that's
great point. I know as a user, if I have a ticket that goes in there and then there's no accountability coming back, the last thing you want to hear is, "Oh, we escalated it and we don't know what's going on with it." I mean, that is
correct. Yeah.
extremely
Yep.
frustrating.
Yeah, and it's not easy to enforce sometimes because let's say in some organizations that have a service management system to handle their tickets, and then let's say you go through a third party provider that is, it goes outside the organization, you lose visibility over that ticket. What you want, and the help desk really can help with that, is to really bring the third party into that process. Don't let them kind of run on their own, but then you have full visibility. And from a business perspective, it's important, especially when you're dealing with third-party providers like Circuit or telecommunication companies and so on, that you have a circuit down situation, you have an outage at a location, perhaps. You want the help desk to control that process throughout, and even enforce some of the SLAs with the third-party company if possible. So there's many things there that the help desk can actually do, not just processing the ticket. So that's one key things, and for that you definitely need the type of things that you see here from a process perspective, having those way laid out processes and procedures to really assist the agents on the operation to do those type of things, and also communicate with the business that this is the function of the help desk, this is what the help desk is doing. And at the end, when you have that kind of end-to-end support or management of those issues from a help desk perspective, you're delivering a good service for the business, and you don't have these situations where the business start going on their own to resolve their own tickets, or the famous ad hoc IT or
Or just
shadow
going
IT.
around telling everybody how bad IT is. Let's not forget that.
Exactly.
They're horrible.
Exactly.
They couldn't
Right.
fix my Windows issue. They're horrible. They may be running all these e-commerce engines and everything, but they're terrible.
Right.
They took
Exactly.
an extra 3 hours to resolve something for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
May, would you add anything to that? I mean, Albert covered a lot of it, but I was just curious
Mhm.
if you had any
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah, he certainly did, and I would echo, Alvaro. It is essential for the service desk to basically have the ownership when you have multiple providers, and there has not been any environment that I have been with that we did not have to engage with multiple providers that
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
basically ownership and responsibility for their own part of the software, hardware, service, etc., etc. But a perfect example of that is telecom, as Alvaro noted. When circuit outages and so on, we're basically in the middle. And, unless your service desk, has all the accurate information on your environment and circuits and IDs and provider SLAs, and contact, etc., they will not be able to really own it. Service desk has to take the leadership to own that. And if they don't, you'll know it, and you'll feel like you're you're lost, you're in the middle of between all of them, and you're trying to figure out where the issue is. At the beginning, everybody has to own it, and the service desk has to lead that process, and everyone owns the problem until it's confirmed where the root cause is and where the responsibility should be put in then to basically, proceed with the steps to resolve it and continue to communicate with, the business, obviously the IT team responsible for that area, in terms of the statuses and escalations, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's amazing to me to this day to when you handle a ticket, because there's so many. Every ticket is sometimes very different. Most of the time it's different, and that to look at the responsibility of that ticket. So if nobody knows who's really responsible for resolving that ticket or communicating the status of that ticket, you immediately enter into a situation where you're not delivering a good service. It's inconsistent, right? It's not clear to, and then the frustrated folks, like Raul said, the Windows team, the help desk sucks and things like that. It's typically because those levels of understanding and communication are not they're not laid out properly in our organization. And that's
Yeah, and I mean, and the challenge is
organization, that's key. No?
What this also shows is the challenge of the service desk, right? And the profile you need of this person has really evolved, right, over the years, because it's not just a person who has an expertise in some type of apps and is solving those problems, which is a junior agent, let's say. There's really this big customer service component. You have to have a process mentality. I mean, there's a lot more to the organization than just the ticket processing side, which I think brings up the next key point, which we see as a huge issue, which is data, right? You really, as we know, if you don't measure, you can't manage, and data is typically very inadequate when people do not have a mature help desk operation, right? And I know that's something that May, you talk a lot about, is having the data, having the information, which is really, really critical in a help, like any almost business, but in a help desk operation. I think that's an area I'm curious where you've gone. I'm guessing that's been an area for improvement, that you've been able to make a lot of improvements, because we see clients that don't know their ticket volumes, they don't know how they're coming in, they don't know how many tickets are being processed by agents. I mean, they just don't have the basic information that to run a well-run help desk. Is that similar to what you've seen, and how you look at things?
Yeah, certainly. I think the maturity of the help desk is definitely an indication of the maturity of the processes and the accurate data that's being tracked on every single interaction and incident, request, change, between IT, service desk, and the enterprise user community. Because a lot of times, you think about this, obviously, every user, regardless who they are, and what they do within the organization, what their responsibility and role is, when they have an issue that's preventing them from completing their job or completing their task, it's very frustrating and it's very stressful, including myself. If I have an issue I'm not able to deal with, I am tense because I need to get my job done, and something is limiting me, of doing so. So yes, it's a lot of emotions involved with it, I think. But to me, as throughout the years with this, of course, you have to basically understand, where the emotion is coming from, but you really have to always try to come back with the specifics and the accurate data. Not to say, you're wrong or you're misled or whatever, but we understand, but here's what we see. Where did we go wrong? Was it something missed with the qualification? Was it something missed with, the understanding, or was there a mistake, made, et cetera, on whoever's end? So the data, showing the data, the actual data and the trends, and, throughout basically the service month or whatever the SLAs, definitely is key to helping set the right expectations and kind of minimize maybe the incorrect perceptions based on day by day and every user, every person kind of needs and frustrations, good and bad.
Yeah, that's super key. I mean, and from a service provider perspective, it's super key to have data, of course, because you have these type of issues of perception of, sometimes the perception is even bigger than just the help desk. Is like Raul mentioned earlier, the whole IT organization is terrible
Yep.
because help desk is
Yep.
not delivering a good service. So when you ask the
Yep.
question, it's like everything. Why do you mean not delivering a good service? If you're handling, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 tickets a month, and you have 15 tickets that are not perhaps were missed the SLA, that's once again to the discussion we had earlier about 100% SLA. The business cannot expect that those 15 tickets are going to be all meeting SLA requirements, where the negotiation or the understanding, if it's being understood between the IT side and the business side, that the delivery of the service is not 100%. It could be 95% or whatever that number it is. It's very important to have that discussion with the business to be able, and the only way to have that discussion is by producing good data, right? Without the data, it's just a perception game, and it becomes a pretty much a big problem and typically a problem for the help desk, and they start struggling trying to do all these things, and start firefighting, as I call it, instead of being proactive of using data, and it just creates a snowball effect from
And
there.
that's where I think a lot of the misalignment gets between the business and IT. You got to have the data to have a business discussion and the business rationale, and then that's how you get people there
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
So things
And the
moving
data
here.
also, one last thing I'd like to add to that is that there's data that is business facing and there's data that is in-house, right? It's for the help desk to operate efficiently that the business don't see. That's what we call the operational level agreements, and those are things internally that need to happen to be able to understand that the help desk is delivering a good service. That's translated into a service level eventually to the business. So there's data on both sides that is super key to operate
No, that's a
an
good point.
efficient help desk.
No, that's a good point. I agree with that, but I just want to make sure we get enough time to cover everything. So I want to keep moving here. So
Yeah.
we can talk forever on data. So just real quick, another polling question, which I gets into that, right? It's the maturity of the service desk overall. If you really think of all these processes and knowledge bases, and how do the individual service desks that you guys have out there, how would you say they compare from a maturity perspective?
Thank you, Raul. The polling question is open and we're gathering the responses. I'll give you a couple of more seconds. All right, so I'm closing the poll now. So very mature, 11%, somewhat mature, 44%, somewhat immature, 33%, and immature, 11%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
No
what are your thoughts
surprise.
on that, Albert? I'm not surprised. That
Yeah, I
seems
mean,
about right.
no surprise actually. It's an interesting thing, and how do you define maturity and immaturity? Obviously, it would be a whole different discussion, but it's
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but it's interesting
Yeah.
to see that and not be surprised that very most of the people are in between the bottom three categories. But from a very mature perspective, it would be interesting to see how that works out. But I think what I would assume is that it's got a lot of the features that we discussed earlier today, as far as having processes and analytics and so on, which is great. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
at least 89% agree there's room for improvement somehow. So that's a
always,
lot.
Right.
yeah.
Which there
Great.
always is. Yep.
Hmm.
Okay, great. So let's keep moving here. So now, based on that, one of the things we wanted to talk about quick, and then how to do it is, obviously we want to talk about the outsourcing alternative and how to outsource. That's what people were interested in. So obviously, outsourcing doesn't necessarily fit everybody, but there's a lot of things that can drive that, right? And every business can make a different decision, but more and more people are starting to use outsource. So let's call it hybrid, which could be a combination of both, because you never fully outsource everything, right? Maybe it's your level 2 and level 3, but you do level 1. There's different models. But May, obviously you as a CIO who's outsourced quite a bit in this area, kind of what is your thinking, when you look at the help desk and whether you keep it in-house or outsource it, and walk us through that, your thought process, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, going into each organization, kind of like I have to understand, what the company and the culture and what they've been doing, and if there's any kind of like set overall kind of enterprise business strategy in terms of outsourcing or not, as kind of a high level. But then obviously I would get into understanding what are the specific needs based on the technical environment and the areas, and assessing the internal, in-house, IT professionals and staff in those areas, in terms of competency, strength, number, or lack of it, all of the above, and cost, and evaluating, again, as we said earlier, the 24/7 needs, or not, or, a subset of that. And then I just basically go through kind of evaluation. Here's option one, full in-house. What do I have to do to basically be able to address this need or this gap? Or, maybe a hybrid, and what's basically the plus and minus of the hybrid, the pluses and the minuses and the cost, versus, fully outsourced. In addition to, I think, on top of all of that, as I consider all these options, what is basically the level of maturity that I see in terms of the IT organization, process, systems, discipline, expectations, in addition to the enterprise expectations, right? With all of that. And then basically I actually, proceed and evaluate those options, and, get kind of, proposals and quotes and numbers and whatever to end up with the right decision for each of the enterprise. In my case, with the 8 companies I've assumed this role, it always has ended up in outsourcing the core kind of infrastructure and support services. It just made business sense, from understanding and addressing the business expectations, in addition to, flexibility and cost as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I would imagine also that, a big factor for you, May, was, hey, that stuff's not going to move the needle for my business, and I need to be able to transform. And I'd rather have someone handle that for me, and I can let me focus my team on what's going to move the needle,
Yeah.
Thank you, Raul. That's very key. And again, in my case, every organization I've been in, it's basically was going through major transformation, major changes, from the business, the enterprise, and IT. And yes, I had, multiple critical priorities to focus on. And of course, the help desk services, core infrastructure, you want to partner with somebody that you know and you trust, and you understand their capabilities and competencies, etc., that you can rely on and partner with. So, I could focus on all the major, other kind of, business impacting priorities, from the business softwares, applications, changes, process, etc. Yes.
That's critical. A great point. And I think that leads to the next place I wanted to go here with, which was, okay, if you're going to outsource, how to do it right? Because it's like SAP projects or Oracle projects. You hear all these people say, oh, I will never do SAP, or, it's going to be a disaster. Well, it's the way you did it. It's not the system. Let's be honest, because there's plenty of people who are running that right. It's the same with outsourcing, right? The model's proven, but you can do it really poorly, or you can do it successfully. And I think you've done a lot of it. So it'd be great to get your perspective. You kind of talked a little bit about it and looking for an outsourcing partner. But I think the question is, when you're looking for that partner, right, what is it you look for? You mentioned already, people that are proven, that you could trust, having that collaboration. But there's also things about models right out there. Like, for example, we run a nearshore model with Costa Rica and some of the other Latin countries, or you can go to a Asia, India, Philippines model, or US, which is very rare now because of the cost. How do you look at all those, May, from pros and cons, and kind of maybe share with people kind of how to look at, when you're picking that outsourcing partner, the right things to look for,
Yeah, certainly. And I've done, many of the different kind of, I guess, models in terms of structure and where the services are being provided from, and the engineers. And definitely it's been key. And, I've done both. I've done kind of, obviously far shore, and I've done near shore, and I've done onshore as well. In this case, the near shore, where Access is in terms of, Costa Rica, It's actually been very effective because it's like almost the same time frame, time zone, the ability for, all whatever major projects and major changes, right? And, to service the organization with the core team within the same time zone has been critical and very important. Not only that, also the structure to basically align, the service desk team and support team within each of the clients. In my case, each of the clients that I've been with is also another critical, evaluation piece because, the service desk is basically the front end of your, enterprise end users and IT, teams as well. It is very critical that they really have the knowledge and the information and continue to learn and grow as the business and enterprise and IT changes, throughout the process. So I think those are all, key, not only from the time zone ability, but also from the competencies and the expertise, in terms of where they're at and the different aspects of IT, especially infrastructure and, service desk, but also the ability to service within the same time zone of the business, at least the majority of the time, and the cost, and, attached to the client in terms of a profile and, having a structure to do that.
No, I think that's great. I agree with you. And I think the time zone is becoming even more and more important because there's more of a need with the agile and collaboration. It's just very, very difficult to do across extended time zones. So we see that in a lot of our IT practices, but even our non-IT practices, that you just need to work closer together. So, the nearshore model kind of gives you a lot of the cost savings, but with that collaboration. And I think the other key point for people to take away, and I want to keep moving because of time, but that you mentioned, I think is critical, is it is a partnership, right? An outsourcing relationship will only work in a partnering mentality, right? If it's a vendor mentality, it becomes difficult, So I think that's a really good insight for a successful relationship. So Alvaro, real quick, I don't think we want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to see if there's some questions, but we'll send this out to everybody. But in terms of outsourcing help desk, like maybe some key things that you think people should keep in mind when they're looking to actually migrate, if they've made that decision.
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned before, as far as designing or understanding those business drivers are key, and make sure that that's communicated properly to the outsourcer so they can tailor their service to those requirements, and having that alignment up front, regardless of all the other things that support the delivery of that service, meaning like service levels and all those things that are absolutely key. Having that alignment up front is absolutely key. And then the way to explain that to the business from our perspective, the way we achieve that or reach that agreement is through our delivery of a very comprehensive service catalog that explains specifically what exactly is going to deliver, how and who is going to deliver the service. So it's very important to make sure that that's done. So I know all the other things here are key as far as the location strategy and the type of cost balance between service levels and price, very important as well to understand. But absolutely, the first one that is here to me is one of the key to make sure that you achieve that alignment.
One of the ones I wanted to maybe highlight real quick, Alvaro, is you have on number 7, the myth, don't fall for the myth of the cost per ticket, right? Because I think that's an interesting one, right? Very often you see outsourcing partners or say, hey, cost per ticket's 14, 15, 16, whatever, and people get obsessed on that. But that doesn't really consider the environment necessarily in terms of the service requirements, the support hours, the coverage. And I think people need to really keep that in mind, right? I mean, that's a key point as well.
And actually,
right?
that's one of the questions that I have, Alvaro, is what is a reasonable cost per ticket?
Yeah, I mean, not all the cost per tickets are, as they say, created equal. As you said, there's multiple things involved in a pricing, but I mean, average in the today is somewhere between 15 to 20, depending if it's business hours. 20 per ticket. That means regardless of the number of interactions that may happen with the ticket, but you also have other things that have to be considered, like times of open service windows, and obviously the scope of the service is absolutely key, as well as the type of service levels that you're expecting. I mean, there's some standard service levels. So if we mean standard type of things, during regular business hours, meaning U.S. business hours from east to west. I mean that pricing is in that type of range. But like I said, not all tickets are created equal, so there's other type of factors that
I would
can.
I would also add that scale matters, right?
Mm-hmm,
Volume and scale impacts pricing, right? If
mm-hmm.
you have low volumes and they could be complex tickets,
Yeah,
you may have a much higher cost per ticket,
very
right?
expensive ticket.
And I think that's what happens with a lot of middle market organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the scale isn't there of, let's say, General Motors, right?
Correct.
That has a lot more scale and a lot more efficiency
They
because of
expect the same service as General Motors, but they don't want to pay for it, right?
right. So that's the balancing, and everybody needs to keep in mind,
Right.
Fabi.
Mm-hmm.
So Fabi, we're here at the Q&A. Was there any other questions that the audience may want to ask here? I know we got
Yeah,
a
we
minute
have
or
a
two
couple
left.
of questions, but maybe what I was thinking is that I wanted to explain a little bit the next slide. Because since a lot of you are in this early stage of exploring help desk outsourcing and what it can mean to you, not necessarily actively looking, what we wanted to propose you that has been very helpful for other companies is a help desk optimization assessment that would get you multiple answers that you may look in right now. One of them would be that we can help you really benchmark your current performance for these key, indicators and metrics that we just discussed in terms of productivity per agent, cost per ticket, first call resolution, to really see how you stand versus your competitors and your industry peers, help you really confirm the level of maturity of your operations. So it's not really something subjective, but something based on a specific criteria from a people, process, and technology perspective. Sometimes outsourcing is not the whole answer. Sometimes it could also be a combination of outsourcing with automation, and we can really help you based on our experience identify what are the best candidates for automation and really give you a flavor of what the feasibility and the potential business case of outsourcing with Oxys could mean to you. So if you would be interested in getting this schedule, we're gonna basically issue a polling question and we're gonna make sure to follow up with those that answer yes. And in the meantime, Raul,
Right.
while people answer this, if you wanna turn it over to last thoughts, I also have a couple of questions too.
Well, I'll just wait, I guess,
Have the
and
time.
once you're finished, and then we'll just wrap it up.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready with the questions, we can answer those.
Yeah, so the question, one of them, I think we addressed it a little bit, is one of my concerns about outsourcing is being able to transition all the deep knowledge that my team has about very specific applications that we manage in our industry. How have you handled that in the past?
I can answer that. I mean, typically the way that works is through a very structured transition process that has very, a specific kind of tasks that allow for the knowledge transfer to take place with a very specific exit criteria, meaning how we transfer the knowledge from the current team to the existing to the outsourcer. And in some cases, a lot of there's that knowledge that is in people's heads or the tribal knowledge, and we, part of that transition effort is to really understand what's documented, what's not, and then fit those type of that situation into what the outsourcer really requires. And that's the only way to do that is to a very structured transition process.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
great.
so another great question, how does integration with on-premise ticketing systems work?
So yeah, from an integration perspective, I mean, it's typical integration with APIs. I mean, we as an organization, we can work with your existing ticketing system. We prefer to work with ours because we have all our analytics and all the metrics and everything is linked to it. But and when that's not possible, then we create just basically, your typical API integration with your ticketing system. So we can then create tickets on our side and it creates it on your end, and then we create that type of connection between our tickets and we'll have to look into what other things involved, like changes or requests and all those type of things, and have to make sure that your ticketing system is obviously compatible from the processes that we actually run as well. So those are there's quite a few factors, but typically it's done through an API.
Yeah. So what ticketing system do you utilize internally, and what is the advantage of using yours versus ours?
We use a protocol called CSAT, which is basically multi-tenant service management solution that supports all the processes that we deliver, from incident, change, request, problem, release, configuration management, those type of things. So it's basically it's a system that is very well aligned with the ITIL framework, which is primarily the framework that we have been using for many years to deliver our services.
Awesome. And this is another great question. I know we're a little bit over time, but
Getting
a
a lot
lot
of
of the
questions.
attendees are still here, so I think they
That's
are
good.
going
That's
to find
great.
it valuable. How to address the complexity with SLAs? I find standardized SLAs can bring about poor performance, focus to get the ticket closed over performance and customer service. That's a great question.
Can you repeat that question? I
So
was
kind of
breaking
like
up there.
how to address complexity with SLAs, because she finds that in a lot of cases, when you go with an SLA mindset, it can bring poor performance because people are more, focused on closing the ticket within the time frame or whatever, meeting the SLA over really providing a good customer service.
That's a great question, actually. And that actually is one of the biggest trends right now in help desk we didn't talk before, which is moving from SLAs to what they call now XLAs, right? Of the experience of the service. And that's one way to measure that, and then look into solutions to specifically address that, which is something that we discussed before about perceptions. You can have the data to back up the perception and say we're meeting the SLA, but actually the business is not happy with the service. So it's very important to understand those two equations and be able to balance, if you will, the metrics that you have, which traditionally you want to run the operations with metrics, but at the same time really measure what we call the sentiment of the client, and then understand what is happening there and make the connection between those two. So that's how there's no really a specific, let's say, formula to do to do those type of things, and it really becomes something that your outsourcer, if he's experienced dealing with those two things, should be able to handle and come up with an improvement plan for those type of things. That if that's happening, if there's a disconnect between the SLAs and the experience, right?
But I think that's also where May's point about collaboration and partnership is really, really important, and really working to identify what really matters. I see sometimes people go SLA crazy, and they have a bunch of SLAs that no one's ever going to look at, no one's going to really ever care about. And I advise, do the least amount of SLAs you need to really measure what's important. I think that's the key thing. Okay, Fabi, is there anything
Very good.
else? Or
Yeah,
are we
one
good?
last question. If I'm exploring outsourcing, but I don't really have good data of my volumes, how do you recommend to move forward with an analysis?
Yeah, when the data is not available, if there's no systems, obviously, they have to have some sort of systems. We use different some assumptions. We have to make assumptions. Typically, we use a 1.2, our kind of old benchmark of tickets per user. So we use the users, the number of devices, and then we start matching the kind of services that you're looking for to be able to understand what the ticket volumes are going to look like. So we start trending that information, and as you get into the operation, you start fine tuning those numbers. But it is basically is typically related to the number of users and the services you're going to be delivering.
Right,
Awesome.
and I think with that you do a baseline that you then work together once you start getting real data in after you've gone live, and you have to expect a period of adjustment there.
Yeah,
but you don't go into it blind.
No, you can do that.
Okay, great. I think that was it, Fabi. So thank you. So I guess as just last thoughts, I thought you guys provided a lot of insight. I'm sure the audience appreciated it. May, thank you so much for your time. It was really valuable. Alvaro, the same. And for any attendees, we'll be sharing the information with you, and hopefully we'll having
Yeah,
some
one of the things, if you want a copy of the recording and presentation, we would be happy to provide one. So you can email Ryan Reader to the email that you're seeing there in the bottom of the slide, and we'll make sure to send it as soon as possible to you.
Very good.
Okay,
thank
great.
you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Have
Thanks,
a
man.
good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.